inspired you uh, to come into this field of organizational development? And what are your professional titles, Crevis?
What are my professional titles?
Yes.
Well, at this point, I guess I'm the professor of leadership and organization development
Hmm.
at the Beatty School of Business at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada.
Hmm.
I have a PhD in organizational behavior from Case Western Reserve University.
Hmm.
I also have a couple of companies that I'm the president of, Clear Learning Limited and Generativity Associates,
Hmm.
and which does leadership development and organization development consulting. And then I'm also the founding director of the Bush-Marshak Institute for Dialogic Organization Development. So I guess that's all my titles. I'm also a father and a husband. Those are important titles for me. Um, what got me into organization development was in the early 70s as a university student. I was very involved in student activism and the anti-Vietnam War protests at that time. Although I grew up in Montreal, it was still a big issue. And I was at a university where um, the student organization was quite powerful and quite active in university politics. We had an ideology around creating greater interdisciplinary studies and creating more student empowerment and representation, both in the classroom and in the university. And I was 19 and I wandered into a course because I was looking for some quick credits. And it
Hmm.
ended up being, and it was during the summer and it was 10 full days, 9 to 5. His
Hmm.
friend said, "Oh, you should take this course. You'll enjoy it." Well, it
Hmm.
ended up being a tea group.
Oh.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and blew my mind, changed my life.
Hmm.
Met my tea group facilitator, was a woman I then became very close with, who mentored me into the field, introduced me to her mentor. By the age of 22, I was working as a teaching assistant in a tea group course and starting to do action research and also learning about organization development and realizing how my my attempts at change up to that point had been coming from a power coercive kind of change paradigm. And I learned about normative re-educative change and it really made a lot of sense to me. It was very exciting, and I got pulled into a whole community of people who were doing organization development and
Hmm.
laboratory education. And so by the time I finished my undergraduate degree, I knew that this was the field I wanted to be in. And I had the good fortune. Um, my mentor, Hedley Dimmock, was doing a presentation at the Organization Development Network Conference in 1976. And
Hmm.
he said, if you can get yourself there, you can stay with me. And so I got myself there, and I was at this conference. I was 21 at that point, and the first night they have a big, you know, sort of cocktail party, and there's hundreds of people, and I don't know anybody, and I'm wondering what to do with myself. And so I go up to somebody and I say, well, I'm interested in group dynamics and action research and large system change. Where do you think I should go to graduate school? Which turned out to be a brilliant question. And because everybody had an opinion and they would introduce me to people, and I met lots of people, and I kept hearing about Case Western. You should go to Case Western. It's a place to go, blah, blah, blah. Never heard of it before. Organization behavior, never heard of that before. Business school, was a little concerned about that at the time. And one of the professors from Case was giving a talk. So I went to the talk and I introduced myself and asked her, and she said, yeah, you should, apply to Case. So I did. And just got in by the skin of my teeth at the age of 23. So I
Hmm.
was doing my doctorate at Case, which at the time, and still is, I guess, Case was connected into the corporate elite in the United States. It's in Cleveland, Ohio, and as a doctoral student there, I just had amazing opportunities. Because their philosophy was they both wanted us to be doctoral students in a traditional sense, learning research methods and deepening our knowledge of the field. But we also had to demonstrate competence at applying behavioral science knowledge to solving problems, which essentially meant consulting. And the graduate students would get opportunities to consult with the faculty. Um, my big break was David Kolb, who was on the faculty, and many people know him for experiential learning theory. Um, had a relationship with a guy by the name of Dick Baker, who ran a leadership development company for, anyway, they got the contract to design General Motors quality circle program. And I got hired to help do that. Um, and then after that, I got hired by General Motors to help implement their quality circle program. So my last 2 years as a doctoral student, I was working at GM, and that was what my dissertation was on. So yeah, it was an amazing, amazing sort of accelerant into my career. But I've always been identified with organization development from an early age. It's been my passion. It's been very good to me, and yeah, I still care a lot about it.
Because what I see is maybe one thing led to another. There seems to be a very beautiful unfolding happening for you to journey through this profession. Um,
Hmm.
I was having a connection because you were a part of a student political oriented movement at the beginning, and then moving to dialogue. So this is also kind of a personality shift inside you. So, do you notice something in you from that position then to evolve as a dialogue oriented organizational change initiator?
Well, I mean, my story of me goes through lots of changes. You know, uh, I would say, yeah. There's so many different parts to that. Um, when I left Case and I came to Vancouver, I met a guy who became kind of my spiritual teacher and also my psychotherapist and my friend and sometimes colleague, and he gave me 5 years of free psychotherapy. um, yeah,
Okay.
somatic body oriented psychotherapy. Yeah, I spent the first 8 months or so on his floor breathing, trying to have a feeling. Because by, by the time I left university, I was so stuck in my head, and 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 that broke me open and started me paying attention to experience and the nature of my experience and experience around me. And I stopped being so conceptually oriented, and that led me down a path of realizing that um, you know everybody's having a different experience and all the time, and and our ability to organize collectively isn't really based on us having the same experience or having the same thoughts or feelings or wants, because we don't. Oftentimes we paper over the differences and don't really allow them enough air, um, and I became more and more convinced that effective teams and effective collaboration required the variety of experiences to be to have voice, and that a lot of what I had been doing as a diagnostic OD practitioner had been privileging a particular experience, a particular way of thinking about things, looking at things, and I would go into an organization and kind of sell that perspective, but always in the back of my mind realizing there was other people who had a different perspective in the organization from mine, um, but kind of like, whatever I would do to, and then more and more believing that, that isn't helpful. That actually doesn't work. I could go and facilitate a meeting where there appeared to be agreements and there are people who appeared to make decisions, and then they'd go back to work and nothing would happen. And then I realized what was going on is people would come into the meeting and say what they said, and then they'd go out in the hall and say what they really think. And you know, and the work really became about how do we get what's being said out in the hall in the room. And over the years, realizing that the big problem there of getting people to say what they really think is because somebody, me, the boss, some authority, is trying to convince people of a certain way of looking at things,
Mm.
and it becomes uncomfortable to have a different way of looking at things, so people just go along to get along. But unless all those different voices actually get heard,
Mm.
um, in some way, you don't really have any kind of alignment or agreement that's going to persist or is sustainable in any way. And the other thing is, and we don't have to have the same experience in order to get things done, because if we did, we never would have got anything done. So because we're not having the same experience. So all of that was going on in the background for me. And then I started researching appreciative inquiry.
Mm.
So Dave Cooperrider was a fellow student at Case Western, and Ron Fry had been my supervisor. And
Mm.
I'd left Case before Dave started the appreciative inquiry work, but I was aware of it, um, and started doing research on it, and wrote some of the earliest sort of empirical studies of appreciative inquiry.
Mm.
And one paper in particular, where a student and I did an analysis of a variety of cases,
Mm.
all the cases that had been published on appreciative inquiry at that point, which is around 2002. And what we did was a kind of a meta-analysis, and we looked at these cases and we asked ourselves which ones were truly transformational. Because of course they were all successful or they wouldn't be published, but which ones were truly transformational? And about a third of them were. And so we compared that third against the other two thirds, and we looked at about 20, 25 different variables,
Mm.
and only three really distinguished those cases, but
Mm.
they were profoundly different. Like 100% were this way and 0% were that way, sort of thing. And the three things that were different were, one was, in the successful cases, a generative image had emerged in all the successful cases, or all the transformational cases. In the non-transformational cases, only one had a generative image emerge. So that's
Mm.
pretty big. And then, the other one was that in all the successful cases, they used what I would now call an emergent approach to the action phase,
Mm.
right? And in the non-successful cases, only one did, or something like that. So what, at the end of that paper, what we wrote was, what's really striking about appreciative inquiry is that when you see transformational change, what's going on is some very non-traditional approaches to
Mm.
action research. Because up until then, I had been thinking about appreciative inquiry, like most people, I think, as action research with a positive question.
Mm.
But now I was looking at it and saying, now there's something quite different going on here
Mm.
from traditionally what happens in action research. Because what traditionally happens is, we go through an inquiry process, we make sense of that, we come up with some solutions, and then we pass them on to our leaders, and they're supposed to implement them, and then we've got an implementation problem. But in these transformational cases, what were going on was we got lots of people together, where we had an opportunity for people to collectively imagine the future they wanted and the things that could be done to make it happen. And then the leaders would say, good, just go do it. Go do it tomorrow. Don't wait for us. Don't wait for a plan. We don't need a plan. We know what we need to do. Just go do it. So, you know, that to me was very revolutionary.
Mm.
And that started me down a path of saying, it's not just appreciative inquiry. Look at open space. Look at future search. Look
Mm.
at World Cafe. All of these methodologies don't
Mm.
start with diagnosis. They
Mm.
start with bringing people together to imagine the future they want to create.
Mm.
And then I think, and as I've studied it, I've come to the conclusion, and the ones that are really transformational use what I now call a generative change approach. And one of the central aspects of that generative change approach is we don't rely on our leaders to have a plan and drive implementation and do that. Instead, the leaders rely on the people who are going to have to change to go make the change happen. However, they go about doing that in a much more emergent process, where the
Mm.
leader's job is to pay attention to what's emerging and
Mm.
find ways to nurture, you know, cultivate, amplify, embed the
Mm.
stuff that's happening that's moving the organization in the direction they want to go.
Mm.
And what I found is that that produces much more change much more rapidly.
Mm.
Um, Now, a lot of people hear the term dialogic OD and think it's about dialogue, but that's not.
Mm.
It's it's not about rules for how to talk to each other. Although I do think, in some circumstances, dialogue is sort of Bohmian style dialogue is very powerful and very useful. But we called it dialogic OD to distinguish it from diagnostic OD
Mm.
because it's more focused on language and narrative and generativity, these sorts of things. Now,
Mm.
the other thing that I think dialogic OD methods incorporate is complexity science and self-organization and emergence and that whole stream of thinking. So it's a combination of sort of social constructionist,
Mm.
narrative-based forms of understanding human interaction and organizations, and the sort of self-organizing, emergent complexity view of nature, of how nature changes, right?
Mm.
And it's a melding of these ideas into a different way of thinking about leadership and organizations and change.
Mm.